And welcome, everyone, to Rock M Nation Podcast, or Rock M Radio now. We're on Season 6, Episode 30 of Dive Cuts. I'm your host, Sam Snelling. Live on YouTube, not live, we'll be uploaded to YouTube later. With me, over here, Matthew J. Harris, all the way from Indianapolis, Indiana. Matt, how are things on the plains?
A little chilly here. Got a little bit of what you all had yesterday in St. Louis, but sans tornadoes. So that was good. And yeah, just waiting for a consistent week of spring weather and for the transfer portal to actually start dying down. It seems like it's ebbing off, but you never know. I thought that the last 2 weeks, and then there's been like things start to get a little bit hectic, after Wednesday, but I think we got to be getting near the end of people going into the portal. We're over like 1,400 names now, so it's got to ease off at some point.
Yeah, we're recording this Monday, April 17th. It is Monday night. That's why it's very dark behind me. And today was probably the quietest day for Missouri news since the portal opened. You and I and Matt Watkins have been doing what we can to kind of keep the roster or transfer portal tracker up to date on a daily basis. And I did not update it today. I don't think you updated it today either, because there was no news that came out today. There was a lot of commitments, and there was a lot of things that maybe touch, Mizzou at some kind of tangent. I know Arkansas got L. Ellis, and our Georgia got RJ Melendez, and there was one other, and then a few other SEC guys. Miles Studi committed from Vanderbilt, went to South Carolina for some
Lateral movement. Is important in basketball. It's very important.
And if you could consider that lateral movement, I mean, I think he was leaving Vandy because he wanted the ball in his hands more. You're like, okay. Everybody makes their own decisions.
Yeah,
up to him what he wants to do with his basketball career. I don't know that that's the move that I would have made. You're getting a pretty quality education at Vandy. You're chucking up a lot of threes for a great coach. I'd be pretty happy with that. Miles was not, so he's a Gamecock now. But yeah, overall, I think we've been in this pattern where almost every day there's Missouri news. Now we got very big news on Friday night. If you missed it for some reason, head over to rockmnation.com and you can read all about Tamar Bates, the Indiana transfer and Kansas City, Kansas native, who was a long-time target for Collins Martin and his program. He spurned not the home state school, but spurned Martin and Mizzou and chose Texas. Shaka Smart took the job at Marquette, which led him out of his letter of intent at Texas. Then he signs at Indiana for Mike Woodson. Had two sort of up and down years for the Hoosiers, but by all means, he's still the player that he was kind of coming out of high school. He's a very talented and high level defender. He's a guy who has a developing offensive game. He's a good offensive player, but I don't think things have sort of come together for him the way that I think maybe a lot of people in Bloomington expected, but certainly a guy that I know you're a big fan of. I'm a big fan of, and I think Missouri is going to be a really good spot for him.
Yeah, first I think the fan base in Bloomington's behaved, pretty rationally towards Tamar going. But I think his process, for IU was one of stops and starts. I think in his freshman and in his sophomore years, he had really good stretches in sort of November to December, and that sort of cranked up the machine of the kind of the narrative cycle of, is he getting ready to move into the starting lineup? Are we seeing him putting it together? And then he slumps in January, sort of drops out of the mix, has a good game in late January, and just sort of like is okay coming down the stretch. But you haven't really seen, all the ability and the pieces engage for a long stretch against quality teams. He's done well in non-con stretches and, against some of the weaker teams in the Big Ten. But there's no denying the talent is there. I still think he's probably one of the better on-ball defenders we've ever watched, at least in the last 7 years that I've been doing this. He's really, really good at that. People in Bloomington, I think, tried to bill him as a 3-level scorer, which I always thought was sort of a misnomer. I never really viewed Tamar that way. The jumper was a good, way to set up for him to eventually build off something, once he got to the college level. But the one thing that he did do this year was show progress with the jumper. Defensively, he was better. You just didn't see, that next sort of step come from him where he could become a guy who could, one, either run the point for them at times, which I think that was the hope. He either become a guy who could sort of backstop, some minutes at the point, or he didn't really become sort of the slashing sort of element that they wanted at the wing. So he's kind of settled into a 3-and-D role, but the 3-point shot, at least his freshman year, wasn't very consistent. So all the pieces are there. The question is he getting into the right situation in Columbia? You wrote about his sort of system fit. We'll see what happens here. I think he had some different opportunities in Bloomington in different roles and different types of, sets for them. It's just going to be, can Tamar put the pieces together consistently and execute? But this is given where Missouri's roster is right now, this is, I think, a pretty strategic bet that I think, carries lower risk. So you're getting a former, top 30 kid who's shown flashes, at a really solid Big Ten program. He's going to get back close to home. You're hoping that a change in system, change in sort of perspective and staff might, coax out that ability. So at worst, you're getting a floor spacer, but the ceiling is still high for him to become a really solid college player. Then we can talk about, what expectations were set for him, coming in. Were they realistic? Were they, a little bit too much hype, given the fact that, I think what happened was sort of similar to what happened with Caleb Love, where there was a nice little stretch coming out of summer and into his senior year, which saw his ranking maybe elevate, 20 spots higher than it needed to be. And that created some false sort of expectations for what he needed to do when he got to college. But you can see all the tools are still there, and it's still a really, really nice pickup. So that's sort of my general sort of like clouded thoughts as we start talking about Tamar.
Well, yeah, and I think like one thing, and we've been pretty adamant for, I would say, a lot of years. You're talking about recruiting rankings and how you can sort of apply recruiting rankings. And the fact that, in each class, there's usually a small collection of truly elite players.
Yeah.
And once you kind of get past that, like, those rankings are very malleable. And it's just like, and so the difference between, and I think like this is kind of where like Caleb and Tamar both sort of got caught up, is they had like good seasons at the right time.
Yeah.
Tamar, for example, went to IMG Academy, and his surge was more like, was very sort of like in that late period of his senior year, where he was viewed as like a top 100 level player before that. But then he sort of hit IMG and he gets on that national stage and you're surrounded by talent, and you fill a role. And I feel like a lot of those guys who sort of fill in roles on those elite teams always sort of have their rankings kind of bumped up a little bit higher than maybe they should be. But by all means, I think Tamar in the right environment and the right setup and the right roles and all these kinds of things is still a guy who could be an NBA level player, maybe a two-way kind of guy, because of his athleticism, because of, if you look at the progress of how well he's sort of shot, step by step, he's a guy, if you kind of get him and consistently be in the high 30s from 3-point range. Is that me saying that that's going to happen for him? No. He could end up just being a very solid college basketball player. But if you're talking about like what his ceiling is, I think that's where you kind of get excited. It's kind of the same thing with a guy like Aiden Shaw. It's really the same thing with Caleb Love. Like, like what if you take the top off, like all those guys could be phenomenal players, but they have put it together. And I think, for Tamar coming back to a place a little closer to home, it's not home, but it's close. Being in an environment where, next season, he's not necessarily, at least from our expectations at this point, he's not going to be a guy who we expect, to get 15 points a game from. He's going to be a guy who, they're going to need to space the floor. They're going to need him to get out and run the floor. They're going to need him to, attack the rim on closeouts, and defend well, and hopefully rebound.
Yeah,
but he's not a guy who we think is going to be like 28% usage. No. And I think this is going to allow him to kind of set maybe like a 2-year plan of, kind of what player he wants to be more as like a senior, possibly as a super senior. Does he qualify for that?
I believe he was a freshman in 21-22, so he might be a little bit late.
Yeah, I think those guys are just on the regular, 4 and 5 year, 5-year plan. So, so I'm excited. I think this is a good fit, and definitely like when you talk about supplementing the roster and filling in talent, I think he's a guy who's going to be able to fit really well with John Tonje and really that group of guards, and a guy who, if Isaiah Mosley comes back, like I think you have your sort of high usage scorer guy, but if he doesn't, I think you could really do like depth by committee from that group of guards.
The one thing I think people should be sort of take some positive stock from is Tamar's also been a guy, if you really know his background, he's always understood, I think, role, fit, and progression. He like from time as a high school freshman, was fine accepting, even if he was talented, he was going to be sort of a bench guy and a sixth man for his high school team. Blew up his junior year at, Piper over on the KCK side. Has a good summer with Run GMC, gets to, IMG, but buys into being kind of a stopper for him. Averaged 11.4 points. Really bought into being kind of a guy they could trust defensively to put on really good players. Took his opportunities when they came to him. At IU, sort of the same thing. Bought into sort of being a guy who showed flashes but was fine kind of settling into a bench role. He's never, you don't read anything of like how Bates is chafed at his role. He has, if you read quotes from this weekend, he understands, I think, accountability starts with himself. So I think if you're asking him, is he going to come in to a crowded house of guards and be okay? I think so, because he's done it before. To me, the perception I have of this move is you've been at a place for 2 years. Is the system going to change? Is the staff going to change? Do you need to change your environment, even if you're on good terms with everybody, in order to maximize your ability? Everything that's come out, has sort of been like this was, sort of amicable on all sides. So I think that's what's heartening here too, is you have a guy who's coming in, who's understanding how to buy into systems, buy into roles, and is maybe just looking for a change of perspective and change of system. And if that's what you're getting, then I think that's really positive, because you're going to find, as this sort of roster and in this age of transfers, you want guys who can sort of function in that sort of environment. And I think Tamar can. It's just, can he put it all together? Can he find the sort of consistency that he wants? If he does, sky's the limit for him. And I think everyone's got to root for him to do that. And I think even IU fans are rooting for him to find some success.
Yeah, I think everybody that that we've come across that know Tamar well, like they all speak highly of him as an individual. It's also one of the reasons why I always thought like Missouri, at least under Consul Martin, might have been a better overall, fit, just personality wise. For whatever reason, it doesn't work out. But he's back. He's a guy who I think is going to help. And then, the question now becomes that Missouri basically has 2 additional scholarships to play with. A lot of people were thinking that the possibility of Caleb Grill, the Iowa State transfer, was going to commit possibly on his visit. That did not happen. He is currently on campus at West Virginia, hanging out with old Huggy Bear, and a team by and large that has really tried to rebuild itself through the portal. Hugs has done a good job. They got Kerr Krisa, the Arizona point guard transfer. They got Jesse Edwards, the Syracuse big man transfer. I know they got 1 or 2 other guys.
Yeah,
the portal.
Can't remember who they got. Jose Perez as a mid-year guy who's been around. I'm just saying that was a big pickup at the time for them. It'll be interesting to see what the decision-making process is there. I think Missouri felt like it was in good shape. We'll see how quickly the process goes. My sense is that it's not going to drag long after the visits are over, but the question's going to be is, how essential of a pickup is Grill at this point? We were sort of talking before we came on, it's an additive sort of pickup, but it's not going to make or break where the roster construction is. And that's not a knock on Caleb or his game or anything like that. It's just if you watched Iowa State, if you sort of, go back and look at, his role there and his usage there, it was in a very, very sort of niche role for Iowa State as kind of a floor spacer, a guy who I think, was limited by his back injury, from, doing much else and really being, or at least effective off the bounce. But most of his shots in his college career, like 70% of them have been catch and shoot threes. He's a guy who's going to space. He's really good at sort of moving and finding pockets of space and making himself available. Defensively, he's a guy who's played a lot off the ball. He's not the guy that's always in the mixer of their no-middle system. So he's a team defender and a floor spacer and a guy that, in a year where Iowa State was pretty short on depth in the backcourt, could give minutes to TJ Otzelberger. But really what you're hoping is you're getting some 3-and-D depth here. But, you look at the shooting that they've brought in. John Tonje's a really good, floor spacer. Tamar, for his inconsistency off the bounce and some pull-ups, became kind of a consistent shooter last year. If Isaiah Mosley is back and he's actually in a full capacity, he's shown he can be a pretty good shooter off the catch. Nick Honor's a good shooter off the catch. Depth hurt this team, or a lack of it, last year, or down the stretch, I should say. But is Caleb Grill going to be the linchpin in that? I'm not sure that that's the case. You don't turn your back on shooting at all, especially not in this environment, especially with the pace that Missouri wants to play. But I think it's important to keep perspective on what Grill would sort of bring to the table there. Definitely add some shooting to the mix, but is he a guy that, you're going to need to have go 20 to 25 minutes a night? Probably not. Again, helpful, but not absolutely vital for this roster configuration to work. So that's sort of, I guess, my realistic sort of outlook on what Caleb can bring to the table.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely like if they had him on campus, clearly like the interest levels for them and for both sides is high. I do think that he's a guy who, by all means will be able to help the team next year. He does bring a level of toughness, a little level of grittiness. He's a plus athlete when he's healthy. And a guy who is capable of knocking down in shots. You sort of bring all those things together, and I think it forms into a guy, who can be a role player on a really good basketball team. And I think what you alluded to with, Missouri's struggles with depth, like once Trey Gamillion got hurt, and it trimmed, and not only Gamillion, but, Isaiah Mosley's lack of availability. Those two guys trimmed the guard depth to a point where it was a struggle on a lot of nights, to sort of be able to rebound, quicker. And you're asking Demoy Hodge, as an example, to play, 35, 36, sometimes 38 minutes, as opposed to, I think what Dennis Gates probably envisioned was him playing more like 28, and really kind of maxing out a guy minutes wise, being in like the 30 to 32 range versus where they were, which is in the high 30s. And that's tough that's tough to do, especially in the SEC, which, we've talked about the level of athleticism in the league. It's a really, really tough physical league, and that can wear you down. And I think it did at times for Missouri.
Yeah, and you look at what they did on short turns too. I think it hampered them at times. When they had to come back and they had to do it on a quick turn against Princeton. That was a team too, or even if you're not talking about physically, but just the ability to sort of look to the bench and go, okay, what can I do to reconfigure some things here to give myself an opportunity? I think they were sort of limited in that way, as the season wound down. The one thing I would say is that they look like they really want to skew towards guards. And I think that's been the thing that's been hard, I think, for folks to reconcile, because the focus has been on what's missing, which is a starting level big. But you really look at what happened when they, had three guards that left the program, and you weren't sure still about Isaiah Mosley's status. So really that's 4 guard spots you sort of have to reinforce. And I think the hard part is it's looked like there's been sort of a de-emphasis, or them dragging on a big, which isn't true. They've clearly prioritized Kadeen Shedrick, but I think people have, need to keep in mind they had to replace 3 to 4 guards, and they had to get a guy that could sort of had the same sort of physicality and sort of role as Dree Golson. That's John Tonji. If you were to look at Bates's usage level and possession and touches at IU, very comparable to Trey Gamillion. And if you landed, at Caleb Grill, he was about 9 possessions per game last year. That you're starting to offset a little bit about what Hodge is there. So is it perfect? No, but you begin to backfill a lot of that production, and you're not taking a hit and shooting. The ability to make open jumpers for him, last year to next year potentially, doesn't fall off. So I think that's just something to keep in mind here is, the pressing need in one position, I think is sort of at times downplayed the need to, do some reinforcements and refreshing at the guard position. That's what it looks like they're trying to do there at this point. That's probably the best way to probably frame it as sort of we come to the end of the portal season.
Yeah, and I think it's worth pointing out, that
Kurt Lewis is still coming.
Yeah, and you do have functional size in Trent Pierce, and Jordan Butler heading to campus as well. I think Trent Pierce is going to play.
He looked good down the stretch. He looked really good down the stretch.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he's going to be like a starter level guy, but I think he's going to be. I think he's going to give them more than what like Aiden Shaw gave them this past year.
Depending on what happens, I think what's going to hinge for Pierce is what happens at the training table in the strength and conditioning program. But if the shot can translate, then I think there's a role for him defensively and as a spacer at the 4.
Yeah, so I think coming in, they do have some functional size, but I also think it's worth pointing out, and I know like you and I have kind of talked with Watkins in our little Slack chat about kind of going against type, and like you look at like what Todd Golden is doing in at Florida, and he is loading up on bigs, but
The scars of Colin Castleton. The scars of Colin Castleton.
Yeah, I think last I checked, last commitment, like I think they were up to 6, and I think there was a possibility they were also in the mix for a 7th big as well. And it's just like I don't really know how many interior players you need, but I think it's sort of interesting to me because both he and Dennis Gates' first year coaches took different lessons away from this past year.
Yeah.
Dennis's lesson seems to be that, look, we did what we did. We had our guards. We were small, and we got a lot of teams to chase us. We had Tennessee and Kentucky, teams that finished at the top of the standings, and they were chasing Missouri around the court and not doing a very good job because all these teams had these big giant dudes. And look, if you can get Oscar Tshiebwe on your roster, you take that guy, right? Like if you can get Jonas Adu on your roster, like what's not to like about a 7-footer with like a 7'9" wingspan? Like I understand the attraction to these players, but when you're limiting what you can do defensively against like a team that's going to play smaller, and that team can exploit you. And again, like Missouri had their problems with rebounding. Missouri also like tended to lose more when they just played poorly offensively. When you have a bad night offensively and you can't get stops, like that's going to lead you to lose a lot of basketball games. But they seem to be leaning into that. And yes, they do want Shedrick. They do want a functional big kind of coming in, whether that's Shedrick or possibly, Jamarian Sharp, down the line, depending on what he wants to do with the NBA. But I do think that final roster spot is going to go to some sort of interior presence. But they want that guy to be skilled. They want that guy to be able to pull up defenders away from the floor. And I think that's where you get with Trent Pierce and Jordan Butler, like guys that have the ability to stretch the floor and are going to force the opponent center to move away from the basket. And then you look at like what Florida's doing, and Florida has all these bigs and not many of them shoot.
The way I would sort of frame it is, if you go back and watch the loss to Alabama in the SEC tournament, watch Alabama's sub pattern. Every time ODR comes in and out, they send a traditional big in. They forced Bama to shrink. They forced Bama to play smaller. And, Missouri's issue, I think, was clearly rim finishing. Noah Clowney was still a problem for him. It didn't mean that Missouri, was successful, but I think they were able to dictate the stylistic sort of terms that game was played on. Tennessee couldn't, just stick Uros Plavsic out there to kill people. Like they could not put a Mauler out there. They were able to force Kentucky to play smaller at times. This team, I think, when they're operating at their best, they're playing, either 5-out, pick and roll stuff, or they're able to have, a big nominally, and Noah Carter who can play out, play at the top of the key, play at the elbows, connect, and even space. They're able to create those gaps, create that room, and the tempo at which they play, puts teams in a bind. I think the difference you have to look at is we look at recruiting of bigs. There are a lot of guys who are big bodies, but elite level bigs are still pretty rare. Do you need to fill your roster with average bigs just so you can say that we've matched like for like? Or do you, look at what Missouri did and, figure out with their tempo, with their skill level, and in space, can you mitigate that? And I think that's what they're leaning into. I think it's going to be hard, for fans to sort of, I think, wrap their head around that, because the SEC is a league that's still, I think, based around size and athleticism, but it's not a very skilled league. It hasn't been for a long, long time. Go look at, 3-point shooting in this league. It's usually one of the worst in the country. Go look at the turnover rates. It's usually one of the highest in the country. Go look at the block rates. It's one of the highest in the country. It is not a league, where you realistically put hyper skilled dudes on the floor. If you're Missouri's taking the opposite tack. They're recruiting guys that can, dribble, pass, shoot, that can play in space. And they're saying that's great that you have guys that can, lean on us physically. Can you play basketball with us?
Right.
And is it guaranteed to be successful? No, but I think if you're Missouri, and we've talked about this, ad nauseum before, how are you going to find an inefficiency to exploit? Are you going to keep trying to copy other rosters with, less, heralded talent? Or are you going to figure out what works well for you? And I think that's what they figured out a year ago was, okay, our concept works. We just need some more depth. And we do need, one proven big, but with this very particular skill set for us to be successful. And I think that's what they're leaning into. Will it work? Will it be, something that's, going to tee them up for major success? We'll have to see, but you can see kind of the template and the thought process they're using as they go through portal season and begin to refresh the roster.
Well, and I would also point out that I almost feel like when you would talk about like those lessons and what lessons were learned, another couple rosters that I've sort of been watching with some intrigue is, Arkansas, because you're going to have to play them twice. And Musselman is, by all accounts, and everybody like always makes a big deal out of how Eric Musselman is like the king of the portal. And granted, he's done very well. There's no way to dispute that Arkansas has not been successful utilizing the transfer portal. But he has a type, and that
flashing light scores
typically doesn't shoot the ball very well. They like this last year's Arkansas team like got a little lucky. They caught Kansas team without Bill Self, and they can do one thing: they can defend. If they're fortunate enough to kind of get a few shots to drop in, they're really pretty tough. So, like Arkansas is basically leaning into what's been successful for them. But I also look at like LSU, and Matt McMahon had a really rough year. They built the roster on the fly. He thought kind of doing the same thing like Dennis Gates did, of essentially kind of importing guys who knew him and knew his style would help, and it didn't. Despite how good KJ Williams was, that guy was awesome. I feel bad that that's how his college career ended. But McMahon has pivoted, and like they have Will Baker, right?
Yeah, Will Baker,
Nevada,
a guy I really like.
A skilled big, a guy with a lot of skill who can shoot, stretch the floor. He's a already formed version of kind of like what KJ Williams turned into. And also they're pursuing like really, really hard Joe Girard, who is the Syracuse transfer, who is a not very athletic, can shoot the cover off the ball. I do my best to avoid Jim Boeheim teams when I'm, trying to watch basketball. But if you watch Syracuse over the last few years, chances are you saw Girard making a lot of outside shots.
Yeah.
And so I feel like, again, like Muss is kind of leaning into what has made Arkansas successful. Is that we're going to be a lot long and athletic. We might have trouble scoring, but we're going to defend the hell out of you, and we're going to rebound the ball. We're going to crash hard, and basically try to form our offense that way. And now we see LSU kind of going the other way.
They got Jalen Cook, who I think is a pretty skilled, smooth scorer. He's not like I would say a guy who's a hyper athletic slasher, but he can do some things and create his own shot sort of off the bounce. Jordan Wright, we saw at Vanderbilt, kind of a guy who at his best is spacing and playing off the catch. And Will Baker's hyper skilled. So I think what they've done is they brought in guys who played sort of in their system, which is ball screens with, zipper action off to the side. It didn't work. They had Adam Miller. That didn't work, and sort of him bouncing back. They went and got Cam Hayes from NC State. That archetype didn't work. So now they're going to go get guys that have shown that that maybe don't match sort of like stylistically, the slashers that they had, or sort of the downhill guys he had at Murray, he's getting guys who've shown they can score the basketball and shoot pretty consistently and produce that way. So I do think there is something to that. Missouri, I think we have to, remind ourselves, Dennis Gates is showing us how he wants to play. He said last week, I want to lead the country in three-point shooting and assist to turnover rate. You go look at the guys that they recruit, what do? Their turnover percentages are usually less than 15%, and their shooting off the catch on open threes is usually north of 36%. Or if you're looking at, bigs, they're looking for guys who are good play finishers. Go look at their rim finishing rates. Go watch how they played last year. Dennis Gates is telling you, we're going to play 5 out. We're going to use some Princeton concepts. We're going to use some, 5 out ball screen stuff. We're going to run some NBA sets. They're a little bit different. We're going to incorporate some of that stuff, but we're going to have guys that can shoot it. We're going to have hyper skilled people, and we're going to play fast. And I think the difference is we get so focused on, the defense and the rebounding were a problem last year. Go look at the Modiar player review. Go look at the numbers when they put a nominally bigger 6'11" dude on the floor. Everything cratered. Rebounding got worse. Defense got worse. It's not strictly about size. It's about how that big fits into what they do. I keep thinking that if you're going to go out and you're just recruit 3 guys who are 3 bigs, so you can say you got bigger, I guess that works, but they've shown you how they want to play. And realistically, they need a big who is pretty mobile, who's comfortable in space, can, work front to back, can recover, and is going to be able to play in some aggressive coverages, and is going to most of all be a play finisher around the rim for them. That's what they need. And, they're after a guy like that right now, but I think we need to leave behind the idea that they're going to just build a copy of Florida State and Columbia. It's at least early on, from how Dennis has built the roster to how they've played, it's very different. It's very different from what you would see from Leonard Hamilton teams. I think people still have that stuck in their heads a little bit as to, what they're going to do with this roster. I think it's going to be a little bit different iteration. And he's showing us and he's telling us what he's doing. You just have to sort of leave behind, the Florida State ties there and not assume it's just going to be a proto version of what, Ham did in Tallahassee.
Well, and there are going to be elements of what Ham did. And I do think, yeah. So I really think, like, when you look at how he's trying to build depth, the way that they want to be able to finish at the rim, like, these are all things that, like, Florida State always was really good at. Florida State was always able to get 9-10 deep without much of a drop off. Yeah, and they finished around the rim. Now, part of those reasons why they finished around the rim were they had, really tall, long dudes who were just athletically superior, and so they could just get right to the rim. And so I don't think you need that in order to be a good rim finisher. Like, you need to understand what it takes to finish around the rim against, especially in the SEC, where, you are going to be facing, long athletes at Kentucky. Like, Tennessee doesn't have, like, the athleticism that traditional Kentucky bigs have always had. But they've always had big guys. And yeah. I think up and down the league, when you look at, like, how the league has always been built, it's always been like these tall, long, super athletic dudes. And so I think there's a lot of benefit to going against type, just as long as you can still play with pace, space the floor, and be able to finish against that length. And I think so you still want some level of size. Like, I don't think you can, send 10 Dree Golstons into Rep Arena and expect to win a lot of games. But you, and no offense to Dree Golston, that was not a dig. It was more
you can't have 5'6" dudes. You can't have
you do want some guys who have some size, and you do and I think they're getting those guys. So yeah, I mean, like Tamar Bates is 6'5" and
plus 3 or 4 wingspan, and
Yeah,
You
but
know,
long and athletic. And then Tajay is 6'5" and pretty developed physically.
mm,
I mean, like Nick Connor's not a huge dude. He's probably 5'10" on a good day. Um, so it's just like I've always sort of thought that the way that he was going to build this roster was like a variety of types, especially when that first roster was sort of put together as a variety of types of players. And so whenever you sub, you're getting something different. And I think you're really going to see a lot of that this year, no matter even how they finish their last two spots.
yeah, they're. I think the thing you have to leave out is it's not going to be 6-7 foot dudes. They're all bigs that they can just fleet those guys in and out. I think they do like length. They want
He's not going to Todd Golden it.
No, he's not. It's not going to be 8 bigs on the roster. But how they finish out, I think, whatever they want to do, they're going to have spots for it. I think that they've, Shedrick is clearly the priority, at the post. If they can pick up Caleb Grill, that's nice. They're not behaving, like a team that I think is expecting to lose Kobe Brown or Isaiah Mosley. You look at the guys they've targeted, it's been about rounding out depth and filling a need at one position. But to speak to Muss's point, Muss went out and got guys who could get buckets. How they get buckets, slants a certain way. But Muss knew he needed to go get guys who could fill the scoring column for him. These moves that they've made, to me, feel like they're rounding out depth and really making sure they've got quality depth because they know that they're going to have two pieces that that they're relying on as headliners. And, the thing that you hear consistently is, Kobe will be back if, he's not a first rounder. He's, forecast now middle of the second round. We know that things happen with two-way deals and guaranteed contracts in that spot. The question is going to be, is NIL or is the financial imperative there for him to do another year here as opposed to going? But what's been consistent is first round or bust. If it's not there, he'll be back. And the thing is, we are 6 days from the entry deadline. Like every day that passes, the odds work in Mizzou's favor. Now he could wait until like 11:59 the night of, or right up to the minute of the deadline to put his name in, but you don't see Missouri behaving like a staff that knows it needs to go out and get a potential replacement for an SEC Player of the Year caliber guy. They just haven't pursued that kind of player in the portal. Isaiah Mosley, his availability, will be interesting to see. But again, they haven't gone after some of the elite sort of scoring wings, even from the mid-major level. So I think they're telling us with their actions and the types of players they're bringing in, they probably expect, at least right now, to maybe have some key pieces back. And that's what's informing their roster construction. And if you look at it through that prism, if you put Kobe and Isaiah Mosley with these guys, presuming they get a big, the roster really makes sense. It sort of unfolds nicely in terms of what a rotation might look like. So I think that's, we could always be wrong. Kobe could, and, Isaiah could go up until the very minute and put their names in and be gone. But this staff has not behaved like they expected to lose two potential all-conference guys in terms of who they've targeted, who they've brought in, and what they're, the kind of transfer that they've zeroed in on. So we'll see. But I think as we come down the home stretch here, this feels like, what they've done is just reinforce the foundation they put in place last year. So we'll see, though. It's still time, and the portal season is nothing if not crazy.
So coming up, we expect probably like something from Caleb Grill this week, I would think, for him to make his decision. I don't think this is something that's going to drag on for very long. Whether it's Missouri or not Missouri, I couldn't tell you. I thought we were in pretty good shape. Might get a commitment, didn't happen. So now we're in the waiting game. The other sort of thing that we're waiting on is Shedrick, who is
Wednesday.
supposedly visiting on Wednesday. This is a very important visit because I think this is the guy who sort of fits what they all kind of want to do with their big in the roster. He's a skilled guy, skilled defensively. He's been well coached. He is a developing jump shooter. And I say developing because like he's shown the ability to shoot the ball pretty well. And so hopefully, so he goes from Texas to Missouri to
Xavier to Duke.
And
that's going to be worked around. We have a live period this week. The coaches have to go out and watch high school kids now, and they're going to love it. They're going to love that. They go out this weekend, so that's going to put the kibosh on visits and push his stuff into next week. So that's longer this thing goes, what you want is for him to call it off on Thursday or Friday, but after that, then you want it to go to the end of the month and get through all the visits,
Yeah. And then the only other thing I think is maybe worth monitoring at this point is probably like the Matthew Cleveland stuff, which we sort of think is not very likely, but the longer that goes as well, because I kind of think, and I think we all sort of agree behind the scenes on this, that that if Missouri is going to lose one or the other of Kobe or Isaiah, we may find out later than sooner. And so the longer they have that time for Cleveland to not have made this decision, then the possibility of them being able to maybe pivot and sort of get in late with some good NIL money available, I think would help them.
Yeah. And again, April 23rd so that's Sunday, is the NBA early entry deadline. That is when, if Kobe is going to put his name in and explore it, it's got to be in by that date. Another key date to keep in mind is May 11th. I believe that's when the transfer portal closes up. So we're within probably 2 or 3 weeks of that happening. And then May 30 is the NBA, the NCAA's withdrawal deadline if you're going to come back.
There's still time for Kalkbrenner to enter the portal, Matt.
Speak it into existence. But so point being, by this time next week, we should have clarity on what Kobe's doing because the deadline will have passed. And if Missouri gets through that, with Kobe still, in the fold, then from there, it realistically is just what does Shedrick want to do at that point. Those are sort of the deadlines that you're looking at. But if you're tracking the portal, there was a lot of activity over the last couple of weeks. There is still decisions coming in now, and there's still some big names that are floating out there, but Missouri hasn't been involved with those names outside of cursory calls. I mean, realistically, what you're focusing on now, like you said, are Shedrick, Cleveland, Grill, and then, what happens with 2 returners. But they've done, a pretty good job so far of filling some needs in the perimeter. We'll see how they finish it out, though.
Yeah, so I think that's all we've got. Went a little over, but we're okay. So if you're watching this on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure that you're subscribed. You get all these sort of notifications when a new video is released. I will be back next week, probably with the other Matt, not this Matt.
Always a Matt. It's always a Matt.
It does make introductions a little easy. But yeah. So until Missouri's roster is full, I'm planning on kind of trying to do this on a weekly basis. So I will be back. If you're subscribed to this podcast here or through the regular podcast means, which would be through the Apple Play or Apple Podcasts or Google Play Store, or you can find us on Spotify. All of those things are ways to get the latest episodes of Dive Cuts, as well as Before the Box Score. And I believe we have a new episode of Before the Box Score coming out this week, or maybe next week. Anyway, those guys are doing a good job covering all the spring football stuff. So I'll be back next week. You'll talk to this dude in a couple weeks, and we'll have everything on Mizzou basketball covered. So until then, thanks everyone for tuning in.